Hi everybody, hello, how are you? I'm Trisha Murray. I live in Edinburgh. I am a therapist and coach, and I work specifically with mums who would like to find freedom from anxiety, trauma and overwhelm. So most of the mums I work with are completely burnt out, overwhelmed and stressed to the max. And I have been doing this for the last, I've been working with mums for the last 8 years, since 2013. And a lot of what I have been working with is mums who are really feeling very, very overwhelmed. And when you try to support these mums to start feeling a bit less overwhelmed, when you try to work with mums to help them to feel like a lot less overwhelmed, there's a lot of things come up. But I thought what might be really, really helpful is to kind of, hi Amy, nice to meet you, would be to kind of give you a bit of background in terms of like, how did I get to this place? Like, how did I start getting to these opinions? I have got 4 boys, so this topic is really, really important to me. So this topic around overwhelm, and specifically to do with gender roles and the roles that we have to play, is something that's really, really important to me. And I come today not as an expert in this area, but as a mum who has a lot of questions around this, and has a lot of questions about what the impact is of gender roles, what it is that, how when children see things, how that literally conditions them from the point of from the point of birth onwards, and really about setting up like good role models and good like examples. So I have got some notes here on my laptop just here, so just to kind of keep me going, because anybody that knows me knows that I can talk a lot and I can go off piste quite quickly. So as I sort of said, like, I'm not promising here to fix anything or resolve anything, but really start asking questions in terms of what our gender roles are and what examples we are setting for our children. So back in April 2008, I finally fell pregnant after 4 years of not being able to have any children whatsoever, and going through IVF. I fell pregnant with twin boys, which was absolutely amazing, and one of the most amazing experiences I've ever been through. Very, 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 very hard. But it was quite interesting in that time, in terms of like, my husband and I never ever had any discussions about who would do what, how things would be. Both of us just sort of slotted into roles of like what my role was like as a mum, and what his role was like as a dad, and they were very, very, very stereotypical roles. And we also never had a discussion about who would like, we also never had a discussion about who would like who's responsible for like childcare and like picking up and dropping off kids, and how things would work. We just didn't have these discussions. It just wasn't really on our radar. We just like, I think both of us just took on without having these discussions, I just took on the role of I would drop off the kids, pick up the kids, I would do work, I was responsible for the house, I was responsible for everything around their care, and my husband was like responsible for like bringing in an income. So everything we did like supported him and his career and him working full time, and I was responsible for literally everything else. And I know that I'm not alone. I know a lot of people watching this will be exactly the same. Now, it's not that my husband's like a bad man. My husband is like a really, really, really kind man with lots and lots and lots of like integrity. If I say something to my husband, he will listen. Like, he's a good man. So I'm not sitting here in any way, shape or form like starting to accuse my husband of doing things. What I'm trying to have these conversations about is saying actually how both of us like have a part to play in this. So both of us have that. Fast forward a little bit further, and I actually fell pregnant with my 3rd child, and ended up with 3 children within 22 months. So that was a complete shock pregnancy. And actually, because of that, I started to then have these thoughts like, how can I ever like afford to ever work again? Because nursery fees are extortionate. You know, they have like, they take up so much. They take up so much of our they took up all and more of my income. So what was the point in like me working? And this is like where it started, because my husband would have never ever ever said that about his job. Like, he would have just kept working regardless. Whereas actually that is, and I know that I'm not alone. Like, I know, and I work a lot with twin mums, so I know like fully in terms of like the implications of like having twins and how much that takes of like your income, that actually I'm not alone in having those thoughts. So it's like, oh, I can't afford to work, I can't afford to do this, not really thinking differently. So actually I stopped working, and I ended up having a complete and utter collapse. I ended up in complete burnout, because really the reality of looking after 3 children within 22 months is very, 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 very full on and very, very difficult. So so I'm just gonna, hi Faye, I'm just gonna rush on a little bit further in my story. So anyhow, without actually realising, like, our gender roles basically split very, very, very much into my husband, like looking after income and like household stuff, like bills, everything, and my thing was all about their caregiving. Like, I was the caregiver, I was the person looking after everything. So and ended up very, very, very ill as a result of it. And I think what I started to realise is that nothing that, like, neither one of us discussed like how things would happen. They just happened. They just evolved. We just both went into our roles without really, 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 really thinking about it. And that was because of like how we were both conditioned. So both of us were brought up in like very stereotypical like families. We were both conditioned in a very, very stereotypical way. And I now work with mums who feel very, very overwhelmed, and quite often you can say to these mums, well, let's have a think about like what you're doing, like where your capacity is, like kind of what's happening. Sorry, I realise I've just gone off on a bit of a tangent, but this is like where I want to kind of get to, is when I work with mums, like we kind of look at the mental load, kind of what's going on for them, what's happening, and we look at like deconstructing some of it. So we look at deconstructing it, so really about devolving it to other people. And the discomfort that comes with that is absolutely huge. And the discomfort that comes with that is like my role, not somebody else's. Like, that's my role, not somebody else's role. And we feel like ashamed to ask for help. Like, we think that is like a sign of like failure, that we're failing to ask for help. So as much as like we can try and get equality and we can try and share out gender roles, we can feel like that we're failing. We're so conditioned by our beliefs in terms of like what we should and shouldn't be doing, so and what our partners should and should be doing and what their roles are, that it makes us feel very, very, very anxious whenever we start trying to deconstruct that and to start trying to change it. And so much of that isn't because my husband isn't willing to take on those roles and responsibilities. It's because I'm struggling to let go of it, and it's the same with all of my clients, and that has come up through all of our conditioning. So as much as I can say to my clients, well, what about like getting your partner to do that, or getting your partner to help out with that, there's all these reasons that come up about why that is impossible. There's all these reasons about why that can't happen, all these excuses about why things can't change, things can't get involved. And it kind of creates like quite a lot of like anxiety. Absolutely, I think everybody can relate to it. I can relate to it. I work in this area, and I can relate to it. So I'm really questioning this about myself as well. Like, I'm not coming today as like an expert. I'm coming here like to start questioning like a lot of this stuff, like how we've been conditioned. And so what I think is really important for me, and it's what I've been working much more on, and with my husband totally on board, so not just me, is to really think about like the gender roles and really think about who's doing what. Because actually, as much as like we're part of that conditioning, what I don't want as a mum to 4 boys is thinking that that's okay, that thinking how things are is okay, and about what a woman does and what a man does is that's okay in terms of like what that split is. And it's really important, I think, that as much as like it's great if women choose to stay at home, that's absolutely fine, but actually really encourage like men staying at home, and really encouraging like that sort of shift, and really encourage about who does what, where roles are, like how things are, and becoming really, really curious, about who's doing what, really asking questions, really starting to think about this kind of like concept of gatekeeping, where we try to devolve something and we try to get somebody else to take responsibility for so we try to get our partners to take responsibility for something, but then we're then not able to release the responsibility, so we're still checking it. Oh, did you do that? Did you pay that bill? Did you check in about that? Did you speak to the nursery about that? Did you? So we're constantly doing that following up, rather than just stepping back and just saying, actually, that's their responsibility. That is like what they need to do. That is like what they've agreed to do. I don't need to check in on that. And if something goes wrong with it, then it's up to them to resolve it. So like a bit like natural consequences. But that takes a lot of discomfort, because we are so worried about that judgment. I also find it really difficult when I first had to. Yeah, absolutely. So I'm just doing what Amy said. Yeah, exactly. It's really, really difficult to give somebody else responsibility. It is really, 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 really hard to give somebody else that responsibility to do that thing, and we have to really kind of question why that is. It makes us feel very, 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 very judged. It makes us feel like failures. It makes us feel very, very anxious that we're worried that somebody else is going to think that we're failing, that we're not doing this thing, that was meant to be our role. But actually, I suppose the kind of questions like I'm really curious about, or the questions that I'm really interested in, is like how we can start to do that, and actually the importance of that. Because actually, for me, I want my children to think that anybody that all roles are like that there's not just specific roles for women and specific roles for men. That actually it's much, much, much more fluid. That everything's much, much, much more fluid, because actually as adults the discomfort comes from the fact is how we've been conditioned. So as much as we can try and devolve things, actually because of our conditioning and because of our programming, we will really, really, really struggle with that. But to recondition our future generations, which is really important, we need to go through that discomfort and come out the other side. So we need to shift what our expectations are in terms of gender roles and who does what in the home, so that we can re-educate the next again generations. And I think that's how we're going to facilitate much, much bigger change. So so I'm just read what the face says. And this is so me, that I constantly remind the husband and kids to do the things that they're meant to do, and then getting on that they haven't. So the thing is just to stop. Just say that's your role. If you don't do it, you're going to have to live with the consequences. So if you don't end up putting the washing in the washing basket, then it means you're going to have no clean clothes. That's it. You can go to school in dirty clothes, but then the fear comes that we're scared somebody's going to judge us for that. But it's about going through that fear and actually realising that actually that's a really, really, really important part of like what we have to do, is actually drive ourselves through that, and drive ourselves through that discomfort and go all the way through, which is really, really, really difficult. And I think it's bigger than this as well. Like the moment we become pregnant, we suddenly become like martyrs to our children. So we become like a vessel to our child. We completely actually lose like our identity in terms of like who we are. And it's not conscious. It's like we don't consciously do it. It's just suddenly we're like, I'm like Peter, Victor and Vincent and Arthur's mum. Like, you lose your identity like in terms of who you are. And I think a lot of these discussions like need to happen like in pregnancy and beyond, all the way through. We need to be having these discussions about who's doing what, like what the gender roles are, about really delegating that responsibility and really encouraging that like complete autonomy. It is the discomfort. It is a really, 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 it's very uncomfortable to let go of things. So, because we're so scared of judgment as humans, we're so scared that people are going to think that there's something wrong with us because we don't conform to society's expectations, that we're going to be excommunicated from the community. And it could be the mum community, it could be like some other community, but we so want to belong and fit in that we're scared to take those sort of first steps. And that's a bit that's so important to do, is to go through that. So this is stuff that I'm still working on as well. Like, as I said a number of times, like I am the expert here, but this is things that I'm really interested in myself, interested in with my clients, is really about thinking about this, because actually it's so important for future generations to start thinking differently. This is really, really, really important work. It starts at home in terms of like how boys and girls see roles and see what people do and see that respect and see that autonomy and see that dignity. It starts at home in terms of how we treat our children. in how we teach our children. So and it's really about creating like really positive role models. As much as like I think it's really important for my boys to see that I work and see that I do things and see that my husband helps out, it's also really, really, really important for girls as well to have those strong role models. So in any gender of any sort of child. I also think that government has a lot to do here. I think there's a really big issue here at government level in terms of shared parental leave, because there isn't true shared parental leave in terms of enhanced paternal leave. So obviously in a lot of places you'll get enhanced maternity leave, but in those organisations you don't get the same enhanced paternity leave. So my husband, in the company he worked at when I had my fourth child, he looked at getting paternity leave, and actually it wasn't what's the word, like the pay was like statutory, which was like a massive pay cut for him, and really, 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 really challenging. So I think actually it's a much more the government needs to have a much bigger input here. So when we're talking about all the things that have happened the last few weeks in terms of like that sort of predatory issue around men, like we need to change in terms of how they see, like how different genders see each other. And actually it starts there, it starts at birth. Like what they see at that stage and what they see growing up is what makes the impact. And actually having much better quality in terms of parental leave would make such a huge impact to that. And I just don't think the government actually even realises that. I think they're using a lot of sort of sticky plaster approaches, but actually it's much bigger than that. But we can do something about it in terms of changing things in our homes, but I think the government needs to do something about it as well. So I don't have all the solutions here. I'm just asking all these different sort of questions. And just continually checking in with yourself, continually checking in about roles and who's doing what. And I'm just going to read what Amy says here. She's, my little boy told me that daddy goes to work, mummy cleans. Exactly. That is such a common commentary, isn't it? I remember like one of my twins the other day said, "Oh mum, it's not fair that you're always cooking. It's not fair that you're always the one that's cooking, you know." And it is, they see these things, they're conditioned right from that stage. One, the other twin at all actually doesn't cook at all. And I do wonder in terms of like what is like his perception is about things. So lockdown's been really, really good for us from that perspective, that my husband's been here and he's actually been helping out every night cooking and every night with meals. But that's been quite a big shift for us. So anyhow, these are some sort of questions to sort of think about. Some of the things that are going on with me. It's really about some of the things going on with my clients in terms of working through that discomfort, working through these things, working out like what that anxiety is really, 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 really about, working through that fear of judgment, that fear of getting things wrong, that fear of failure, that fear of things not getting done, getting comfortable with things getting done, not necessarily being perfect. These are a lot of the things that I think we can work through in terms of starting to shift that mental load. And then once we've shifted that mental load, then that supports like our monkeys to see things in a completely different way. And I think that that is so important for facilitating change. So anyhow, hope that that's been helpful, hope that's been insightful. This was just my commentary around it because I think it's a really important dialogue that we have, it's a really important insight to identify our conditioning and how that impacts us now, and therefore how we can change the conditioning of our children in terms of what they think is right or wrong. So hope that's helpful. Thank you so much to Amy for organising this week, and take care. See you later. Bye.